Hey biology, we're continuing 22.4 today. And I'm in lab because I did some dissection of flowers, so we can do some checking of that later to finish up our notes. But the goal of this video is to cover the rest of flowering plants, which we call angiosperms. We talked about how they're different than gymnosperms, and we're really trying to prepare for a quiz tomorrow. So let's start here with a review. The screen I have in front of you right now is flowers and fruits, because that's really what we talked about yesterday. What are the key features of angiosperm reproduction? Flowers and fruits. And we really did spend just a bit of time talking about exactly how that works. How flowers, when they pollinate by wind or by bug, they pollinate into seeds, and those seeds are protected by fruit. So we've been reviewing this a lot with the angiosperm plant. And you've probably picked an angiosperm most likely for your research that you're working on this week. But that's just a review. There it is in summary form. Angiosperms reproduce sexually by means of flowers. Pollen is carried by wind or animal to other flowers to fertilize, sometimes themselves. After fertilization, the ovaries inside the flowers develop into fruit that protect it. And then if animals eat the fruit, they can later disperse the seeds. So there's the process, just a glorious way of cycling the plant through its life cycle. Today we want to talk about what makes different angiosperms or flowering plants different. So the one big one I want to start with is two terms called monocot and dicot. So all flowering plants fall into one of these two categories, monocot and dicot. And the term monocot and dicot come from one for mono, or di is two. And it has to do with inside the seed. Okay, so when you look inside a seed as it starts to grow, starts to germinate, you're going to find that the plant starts with one leaf inside the embryo, or two leaves inside the embryo. And the video I have linked there, I'll put on the Teams for you. But that video shows you the growth of plants, and you can see clearly as they grow that some plants show that feature of a dicot, one, two different leaves that make them dicot. So that's the big reason behind the name of monocot, dicot, but there are others as well. And just a key note here, that when you classify monocots, they all really fit a single category, but dicots are so diverse that you've got it split into 4 different categories. Now, I'm not concerned about you learning the difference between these 4, but I just want you to recognize that dicots are much more various, and monocots are very similar to each other. So there you have the different categories. Let's look at other reasons that make monocots and dicots different. How are they different from each other? Well, we talked about the seeds, and inside the seed, that little leaf inside the seed has a name for it. It's a cotyledon. Okay, and the cotyledon is the difference between the two. Okay, a single leaf and two leaves inside. But then you also have the style of leaf. In monocots, the leaves of the flower have parallel veins, so a nice big long vein down the middle, and then the other veins run along with it. Parallel veins, it's called. That's how it moves nutrients and water through its system. But dicots will have branched veins. So you look at the leaves and they have several veins that branch off into different locations. So that's what makes the monocots different between leaves. There are others too. Monocots and dicots are different with number of petals of their flower. Monocots are always multiples of 3. So you can have 3 leaves. That picture has a plant with 6 leaves, 9, and so on. 12, sometimes they get bigger. Okay. And then the dicots have multiples of 4 or 5. So then you go, well, what happens if you have a plant that has 12, right? Because you could have 5 or 10, or you could have 4 or 8 or 12. And over here you can have 12. So then what? Well, then you got to look at other features of the plant to decide if it's a monocot or a dicot. Okay, you can look at the stem. Now that one you'd have to dissect to find. Does it have vascular tissue inside the stem? Remember, vascular means those tubes that run through the xylem and the phloem. Okay, and what happens to those tubes? How are they organized? Do they run along the outside with speckled in the center, or are they all on the outside with no vascular tissue in the center? That's the difference between dicot and monocot, arranged in a ring. Then the roots too are also a giveaway. Is the tap root, does it go straight down with little fibrous roots coming off the side, or is it more of a fibrous root in general where you have several roots that are coming off and spreading like a fan? So those are different ways you can determine monocots and dicots. You could see how a quiz could be done asking you for one of those characteristics to determine the monocot and the dicot. Okay, so the difference between monocots and dicots have many different things you can look at. The vascular tissue in the stem, the roots, the leaves, or the number of petals in the flower are the ones you're looking for. So let's just do a quick test. Which one here is the monocot and which one is the dicot based on their leaves? Okay, monocot has the parallel, right? And the dicot has the branched. So the monocot's on the left and the dicot's on the right. How about flower? Which one is the monocot and which one is the dicot? Well, this plant has 3, and if you look in the background, you've got parallel veins. See that? So you've got 2 things you can look at there in that picture. That's the monocot. Okay? This one over here has 5, and you can't see its leaves as well, but you can kind of see out here that the leaves are branching a little bit. So those are 2 clues that this is the dicot over here on the right. Okay, one other way of separating flowering plants. So moving past monocot and dicot. So we looked at monocot and dicot, and we are going to set those to the side real quick and look at the difference between woody and herbaceous plants. Okay, so flowering plants can be split into 2 categories depending on how tough their cell walls are. So you have woody plants that have thick, tough centers to them. So they're things like trees, right? And you have herbaceous plants that are non-woody, and their stems are smooth and soft, like a lot of your smaller flower plants or grass, okay? Here I've got a scene where you have a mixture of both woody plants and herbaceous plants. And your goal is to kind of determine which ones are more herbaceous and which ones are more woody. So put an H's and W's on there. Let's see what you can figure out. Okay, the plants up in front, a little hard to determine, but they're pretty small, and it looks like these in particular have kind of softer looking stems to them. So I would say those probably fit herbaceous. But again, you might have some tougher, these look like really tough woody stems over here, so you might have some plants that are mixed in there that you could say are woody with the W, okay? The grass out there, is it a flowering plant? Yeah, grass actually has flowers to it. So that could actually be herbaceous, okay? And then the trees out there, they probably have flowers as well. So we would probably say that those are woody. Okay. What about the pine trees here? What do we do with those? You say, well, definitely woody. Yeah, but you have to be careful. Remember that needled trees have cones. And so these are actually gymnosperms and not necessarily angiosperms, right? And we're talking about the difference in angiosperms. Well, even though they do fit woody pretty well. Okay, last characteristic we want to look at is how long flowering plants take to grow. Some plants grow and die in the same year. They're called annuals. Some plants take longer than 1 year. They take 2 years to bloom. Okay, those are biennials. And some are perennials. Perennials means that it continues to grow from year to year. So it doesn't stop. It just continues to grow, and it'll lose flowers and gain flowers year after year after year. So it just keeps going and going and going. Those are perennials. So you can see how people design their gardens this way so that they have a variety from year to year. Just a few more characteristics here about annuals, biennials, and perennials. But mostly you can see that we've talked about the characteristics. Okay, die just in one growing season. Okay, grow very short stems. We didn't say that about biennials, but by year 2, then they grow into that flower. Okay, and then perennials, didn't mention this, but we can. Okay, woody stems, and some have herbaceous stems, so a little bit of both. Okay, depending on what they're like. And you've got examples of the different types over there. So you may wonder why your tomatoes only grow 1 year and then die. Well, it's because they're annuals. They don't grow year after year after year. Okay. So we really did cover a lot today with angiosperm diversity. Angiosperms are often grouped according to their number of seed leaves, the strength and composition of their stems, and then the number of growing seasons they live. Those are the 3 main categories, right? Seed leaves, monocot, dicot, composition of stem, woody or herbaceous, monocot, dicot, woody or herbaceous, right? And then finally, growing seasons. We said annual, biennial, or perennial. And so those are the 3 categories we looked at together. So this is the last slide that you have, and you can see you have a picture of an orchid and its many different parts of flower. The orchid's known for having so many big, large parts of it. In fact, I have one here with me that you can probably see down in my screen. The lily's pretty popular now. It's Easter time. And so you can look at this flower and maybe check out if it is monocot or dicot by some of its characteristics, right? Let me just jump here to big full screen. There we go. So you can see the flower. Monocot or dicot. Let's see, count the petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a monocot. And you'd know that too if you looked at the stem a little bit or other characteristics like its roots. And so you can also see that there's tons of pollen on the leaves too. You can see the black little dots. So these anther are spreading that pollen around, the anther and the filament. Here's a little closer look at what the anther and the filament looks like, right? Anther and filament. Okay, and then you can also see the style. This is the female part of the plant. The female part of the plant collects the pollen from the anther, the male part. Okay, so you can see where the male part is, right? And then the stamen, the one that's right in the center there, right there. Okay, and we can take a closer look at some of these parts too. And we're going to use my slides to do that. So, first thing I want to find for you, here we go, a little dark. We'll see if we get a closer look. Ah, there we go. Those are the ovules. Okay, you can see they're kind of rounded and connected together. All those ovules can produce seeds if they're given pollen. Speaking of which, let's check that out next. In the center of my slide, you can see, zoom in a bit, there we go. You can see all the pollen, little pollen pellets right there. And that's what travels through the air, gets caught on animals to get moved from one plant to the next to pollinate. And finally, the last thing I have on my slide is the stem. One thing we can determine about a plant, if it's monocot or dicot, is looking at the stem and its vascular tissue. So if we get a close look at the vascular tissue of the stem, you can see there's the edge of the plant, and inside, all we have is several open circular cells that are designed for collecting and transferring water. So there's no ring that's going on here in the stem. It's all different vascular tissue, which means that it's more of a monocot than a dicot. So there are some examples for you to determine the difference between a monocot and a dicot, and we took a closer look at the orchid lily. So remember that you have a quiz tomorrow, so make sure you're doing your reading and studying your notes.